A quiet night turns extraordinary. Amara Johnson was no stranger to long nights. At 29 years old, she had spent the last 3 years working the evening shift at Sonny's Diner in downtown San Francisco. The small, cozy establishment nestled between a used bookstore and a vintage record shop was her haven. The neon sign outside cast a warm glow on the damp pavement, a beacon for regulars seeking solace in steaming coffee and warm slices of pie. For Amara, the diner was more than just a job. It was a place where conversations flowed freely, laughter echoed, and stories were shared over countless coffee refills. Her easy smile and kind eyes made her a favorite among the patrons, who often stayed longer than necessary just to chat. That Tuesday evening started like any other. The usual crowd filled the booths, the air buzzing with familiar banter. Amara moved gracefully between tables, her apron stained with splashes of coffee and syrup. The bell above the door chimed, and she glanced up, her routine momentarily interrupted. Her breath caught. There, shaking rain from his dark coat, stood Keanu Reeves. Yes, the Keanu Reeves. Dressed simply in jeans and a black sweater, his damp hair framing his face, he moved toward a corner booth, quietly seeking refuge from the rainy evening. Amara's heart raced, but she quickly regained composure. To her, he wasn't just a movie star. He was a symbol of kindness, a man known for his generosity and humility. "Good evening," she greeted him, her voice steady despite her nerves. "What can I get for you tonight?" Keanu glanced up, his eyes soft and tired. "Just coffee. Black." He hesitated, then gestured toward the dessert display. "And maybe a slice of apple pie." Amara smiled. "Coming right up." A challenge in the quiet. As she walked back to the counter, the atmosphere in the diner shifted. Whispers rippled through the room, excitement tinged with curiosity. Most customers kept their admiration subtle, sneaking glances and hushed exchanges. Most, but not all. Earl McGowan, a longtime regular with a penchant for loud opinions, was anything but subtle. His grizzled face twisted into a scowl as he stared at Keanu. Earl had been coming to Sonny's for 2 decades, claiming the same stool at the counter each night. Tonight, however, he abandoned his usual spot, striding purposefully toward Keanu's table. Well, Earl declared loudly, his voice cutting through the diner's chatter. "If it isn't Mr. Hollywood himself. Must be nice, living the high life, while the rest of us struggle to make ends meet." Keanu looked up from his coffee, his expression calm but wary. "Everyone has their struggles," he said gently. "We're all just trying our best." But Earl wasn't satisfied. "I read about you online. All that money. And what do you do with it? Bet you've never worked a real day in your life. Fancy cars, private jets. You've probably never had to earn an honest dollar." The diner fell silent. Even the clinking of dishes in the kitchen stopped. Amara, carrying Keanu's pie, froze mid-step. Her heart pounded as she listened to Earl's accusations. She knew better. She'd read about Keanu's quiet acts of generosity, how he gave away most of his earnings from the Matrix, supported cancer research after his sister's battle with leukemia, and treated his colleagues with unparalleled respect. Setting the plate down, Amara straightened her back. "That's not true," she said firmly, her voice clear in the stillness. "Keanu has donated millions to hospitals and cancer research. He's helped countless people, and he doesn't do it for attention. If you spent 5 minutes looking up the truth instead of spreading lies, you'd know that." Earl turned to her, his face reddening. "Nobody asked you, girl. Since when do waitresses defend millionaire movie stars? Since people like you spread baseless accusations about good people." Amara shot back, her voice unwavering. "Standing up for the truth isn't about who it's for. It's about what's right." The silence grew heavier. Keanu looked at her, a mix of gratitude and admiration in his eyes. But before anyone could say more, the diner owner, Mr. Sullivan, emerged from the kitchen, his expression thunderous. "Amara," he barked. "My office. Now." The cost of integrity. In the cramped office, Mr. Sullivan didn't mince words. "You're fired," he said bluntly. "We don't argue with customers here, especially not regulars like Earl." Amara stared at him, disbelief washing over her. "You're firing me for standing up to a bully, for telling the truth." "I'm firing you for disrupting my business," Mr. Sullivan replied coldly. "Earl's been coming here for 20 years. His friends too. I can't risk losing customers because you want to play hero to some actor." Tears burned in Amara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. With a deep breath, she said, "If standing up for what's right costs me my job, so be it." She walked out of the office with her head held high, though her heart felt heavy. As she gathered her things, Keanu approached her quietly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice sincere. "You didn't have to defend me, but you did. Thank you." Amara managed a small smile. Sometimes the truth is worth standing up for. A life-changing call. The next morning, Amara woke to several missed calls from an unknown number. Confused but curious, she answered when the phone rang again. "Hello, Ms. Johnson," a voice said warmly. "This is Emily from Keanu Reeves' production company. Mr. Reeves was deeply moved by your courage last night. We're producing a documentary series about everyday heroes, people who stand up for what's right, even when it costs them. He'd like to offer you a position on the project." Amara's breath hitched. "A position? Doing what?" "Sharing your story," Emily explained, "and helping us find others like you. Your integrity and bravery are exactly what we want to highlight." Tears streamed down Amara's face as she listened. In standing up for someone else, she had inadvertently changed her own life. The documentary not only offered her a platform to inspire others, but also provided her with a fresh start, a chance to turn her values into a career. The power of courage. Months later, Amara stood on a stage at the premiere of the documentary, her heart full of gratitude. The project had taken her across the country, meeting ordinary people with extraordinary stories of courage and kindness. She had found her voice, her purpose, and a community that celebrated integrity. In the audience, Keanu Reeves watched with a quiet smile. When their eyes met, he nodded, as if to say, "You made a difference." Amara realized then that standing up for what's right wasn't just about a single moment. It was a ripple that could change lives, including her own. Her journey proved that courage, even in the smallest acts, has the power to transform the world. The storm within the diner. The hum of conversation in Sonny's diner told as the atmosphere shifted. Whispers swirled around Keanu Reeves' quiet corner booth, a low murmur of disbelief and excitement. Amara noticed this shift immediately. Regulars like the Smiths at table 4 and Diane from the corner stool were casting sly glances at the Hollywood star, their curiosity palpable but respectful. Not everyone shared the same restraint. Earl McGowan, a man as much a fixture of the diner as the neon sign outside, pushed back his stool with a scrape. A retired dock worker in his late 60s, Earl was known for his gruff demeanor and unfiltered opinions. He was a nightly presence at Sonny's, always with a cup of black coffee and a scowl for free. Tonight, though, his eyes narrowed on Keanu, as though he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. "Would you look at that?" Earl muttered loudly, his words slicing through the diner's chatter. "Mr. Hollywood, gracing us with his presence." Amara felt a flicker of unease. Earl's voice had that familiar edge, a mix of disdain and misplaced bravado. He stood up, his bulky frame towering over his usual spot by the counter, and ambled toward Keanu's table. His boots clomped against the linoleum floor, each step heavier than the last. "Must be nice," Earl continued, his voice rising with each word. "Living in your mansion, flying your private jets, while the rest of us scrape by." Keanu looked up from his coffee, his expression calm but guarded. "Everyone has their struggles," he said evenly. "We're all trying to make it through." Earl scoffed, leaning on the edge of the booth with both hands. "Struggles? What do you know about struggles? You've got more money than you know what to do with. Bet you've never worked a real day in your life." The air in the diner thickened, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Even the clatter of dishes in the kitchen had stopped. Amara froze, a tray of steaming coffee mugs balanced in her hands. Her mind raced. She knew Earl's temper well enough to recognize this wasn't going to de-escalate on its own. But she also knew the truth about Keanu Reeves. She'd read the stories, seen the interviews. He wasn't just another wealthy celebrity. He was the man who quietly gave away millions to hospital workers, who rode the subway alongside commuters, who had funded cancer research in honor of his late sister. Earl's accusations couldn't be further from the truth. Earl jabbed a finger at Keanu, his voice louder now. People like you don't get it. You'll never get it. All that money and no idea how the real world works. Amara felt something stir within her, an anger that burned not out of recklessness, but out of a deep sense of justice. She set the tray down on the counter with deliberate care and stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "That's enough, Earl," she said firmly. Earl turned to her, his face etched with irritation. "What's it to you, Amara?" "It's everything to me," she replied, her tone unwavering. "Because what you're saying isn't just wrong. It's unfair. Keanu Reeves has done more for others than most of us can imagine. He's donated millions to hospitals, funded research for cancer treatments, and helped countless people in ways he never even talks about. You're standing here judging someone you don't know, and it's not right." Earl's face flushed, a mix of embarrassment and anger. "And how do you know all that? Just because you read it online?" "No," Amara shot back, her voice rising. "Because I take the time to look for the truth instead of spreading baseless accusations. And the truth is, he's one of the good ones." The diner fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. All eyes were on Amara, the waitress who had always been warm and welcoming, now standing tall and unyielding in the face of injustice. Keanu looked at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and quiet admiration. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. Earl muttered something under his breath and stomped back to his stool, his bravado deflated. The rest of the diner remained still, the weight of the moment lingering like a storm that had just passed. Amara felt her knees weaken as the adrenaline coursing through her began to fade. She turned to Keanu, offering a small apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that," she said. "You didn't deserve it." Keanu shook his head, his gaze steady. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "But you did. That took courage." Amara shrugged, though her heart was still racing. Sometimes the truth needs someone to stand up for it. A sudden downfall. As the tension in the diner eased, life seemed to flow back into the room. The quiet clatter of dishes resumed, and whispers of admiration for Amara's bravery floated between tables. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that the confrontation with Earl had ended without further consequences. That hope was short-lived. Mr. Sullivan, the diner's owner, stormed out from the back kitchen, his face an angry shade of red. His presence was commanding, and the sudden hush that fell over the room was louder than any shout. He was a stout man with graying hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, a figure of authority who prided himself on keeping the diner running like clockwork. Amara had never seen him this angry. "Amara," he barked, his voice sharp and cutting through the low murmurs of the other customers. "My office. Now." The room stilled again, the weight of his words pressing down on Amara like a physical force. She swallowed hard, casting a quick glance at Keanu, who was watching with concern etched into his features. Her stomach knotted, but she straightened her back and followed Mr. Sullivan through the swinging doors and into the small, cramped office behind the kitchen. The walls of the office were lined with faded photographs of the diner in its early days, a cluttered desk in the center piled high with receipts and order logs. But none of that mattered now. Mr. Sullivan's anger filled the space, making it feel even smaller than it was. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he demanded, his voice low but seething. Amara blinked, confused by his hostility. I stood up for the truth, she said, her voice steady despite the sinking feeling in her chest. No, you disrupted my business, he shot back, slamming a hand on the desk for emphasis. Earl's been a regular here for 20 years. He's brought in friends, family, people who keep the lights on in this place. And now you've gone and embarrassed him in front of everyone. Amara clenched her fists, willing herself to stay calm. With all due respect, Mr. Sullivan, Earl was out of line. He was harassing a customer. A customer? Mr. Sullivan interrupted, his tone incredulous. Do you think Keanu Reeves is going to come back here? He's a one-time visitor, Amara. Earl is the bread and butter of this place. You don't pick fights with regulars. I wasn't picking a fight, Amara countered, her voice rising in frustration. I was standing up for someone who didn't deserve to be treated that way. Since when is telling the truth bad for business? Mr. Sullivan shook his head, his expression hardening. This isn't about truth, Amara. It's about keeping customers happy. And Earl is not happy. I can't afford to lose him or anyone else he brings in. Amara stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling in her chest. So you're siding with a bully because he spends money here? I'm protecting my business, he said flatly. And because of your little outburst, I'm letting you go. Pack up your things and leave. The words hit her like a blow. Amara's breath caught, her mind struggling to process what he had just said. Fired. For doing the right thing. The unfairness of it all burned in her throat, but she forced herself to speak calmly. You're firing me for standing up to a man who was attacking someone else, she asked, her voice trembling only slightly. For standing up for what's right. I'm firing you for disrupting the peace and putting my business at risk, Mr. Sullivan snapped. Now clear out your locker before you cause more trouble. Amara opened her mouth to argue, to plead her case, but the look on Mr. Sullivan's face told her it would be futile. He wasn't going to change his mind. With her heart pounding, she turned and left the office, walking back into the diner with as much dignity as she could muster. The regular hum of activity had returned, but all eyes followed her as she crossed the room. She kept her head high, refusing to let the tears welling in her eyes fall. Keanu stood as she approached her locker near the back door, his expression filled with concern. What happened? He asked softly. Amara gave a small, bitter laugh as she shoved her belongings into her bag. I got fired, she said simply. Apparently, standing up to Earl was bad for business. Keanu's brow furrowed, and for a moment, he seemed to search for the right words. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice full of genuine regret. You shouldn't have had to pay for defending me. She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she zipped her bag. It's not your fault, she said, forcing a small smile. Sometimes, doing the right thing has consequences, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. Keanu studied her for a moment, his expression softening. That kind of courage, it's rare, he said. And it matters. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. Amara nodded, his words a small comfort in the midst of her storm. She slung her bag over her shoulder and turned to leave, casting one last look around the diner that had been her sanctuary for so long. The place felt different now, smaller, colder. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped out into the rain. The cool droplets on her face mingled with the tears she could no longer hold back. As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of something new, something she couldn't yet see. A new chapter begins. The next morning, Amara woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. Disoriented and still weighed down by the events of the previous night, she groaned and reached for it, squinting at the unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Her instincts told her to ignore it. After all, what good ever came from early morning calls? But something made her answer. Hello, she said groggily, her voice thick with sleep. Good morning. Am I speaking with Amara Johnson? A bright and professional voice greeted her on the other end. Yes, this is Amara, she replied cautiously, sitting up in bed. "Who's calling?" "This is Emily Parker," the voice continued warmly. "I work with Keanu Reeves' production team." Mr. Reeves was incredibly moved by what happened last night at Sonny's Diner, and he asked me to reach out to you personally. Amara's heart skipped a beat. She clutched the phone tighter, her mind racing. "Oh," she stammered. I don't know what to say." Emily chuckled softly. "That's all right. I'll cut to the chase. We're currently producing a documentary series called Everyday Heroes. It's about ordinary people who show extraordinary courage in their daily lives. People who stand up for what's right, even when it costs them something. After hearing about what you did, Keanu insisted that you be a perfect fit for this project." Amara blinked, stunned into silence. "You want me to be in a documentary?" "Not just in it," Emily clarified. "We'd like to offer you a position on the team. We want you to share your story, but we also think you'd be amazing at helping us find other stories of everyday courage. Keanu believes you'd bring a unique and authentic perspective to the project." The room seemed to tilt slightly as Amara tried to process what she was hearing. Just yesterday, she had lost her job for standing up for someone else. Now that same act of courage was opening a door she never could have imagined. "That's incredible," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But why me? I'm just a waitress. I don't have experience in anything like this." "That's exactly why," Emily said. "You're real. You're relatable. And your courage speaks louder than any resume. Keanu sees something special in you, Amara. We all do." For a moment, Amara sat frozen, the weight of the opportunity settling on her. A part of her felt unworthy, unsure if she could rise to the challenge. But another part, the part of her that had stood up to Earl, that had refused to back down even when it cost her everything, knew she couldn't let fear hold her back. I'd love to," she said finally, a tentative smile spreading across her face. "I don't know exactly what I'm getting into, but I'm willing to try." Emily's enthusiasm was palpable. "Fantastic. I'll send over the details today. We'll arrange for you to fly out to Los Angeles next week to meet the team. And of course, Keanu is looking forward to personally welcoming you." As the call ended, Amara sat in her small apartment, her phone still clutched in her hand. The overwhelming mix of emotions, shock, gratitude, excitement, washed over her all at once. She had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The first step into the unknown. A week later, Amara found herself stepping off a plane at LAX, her nerves buzzing with anticipation. She had never been to Los Angeles before, and the sprawling city felt like another world entirely. One where anything was possible. She was greeted by a sleek black car that whisked her away to a modest but elegant office building in the heart of the city. Inside, she was met with smiles and handshakes from the production team, who made her feel welcome despite her nervousness. Emily, a young woman with a vibrant energy, introduced herself in person and guided Amara through the office, explaining the vision for the project. "Everyday Heroes isn't just a documentary," Emily said as they walked. "It's a movement. We want to inspire people to see that heroism isn't about capes or superpowers. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And your story is the perfect starting point." Amara nodded, the weight of the project sinking in. "I never thought of myself as a hero," she admitted. "I just did what felt right." "That's exactly why your story matters," Emily said with a smile. "It's real, it's honest, and it's exactly what people need to hear." After a whirlwind day of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and introductions, Amara finally met Keanu again. He greeted her with the same kindness and humility that had struck her that night in the diner. "Amara," he said, shaking her hand warmly, "I'm so glad you're here. What you did that night, it wasn't just brave, it was inspiring, and I want to help share that with the world." For the first time, Amara allowed herself to truly believe that her actions had made an impact. She wasn't just a waitress who had lost her job. She was someone who had stood up for what was right, and now She had the chance to turn that moment into something much bigger, building a legacy of courage. Over the next several months, Amara threw herself into the project. She traveled across the country, meeting people from all walks of life who had shown extraordinary courage in their own ways. A single mother who stood up to corrupt landlords, a teenager who fought for environmental justice in her community, a retired teacher who advocated for racial equality. Each story moved her deeply, and with every interview, she grew more confident in her role. She wasn't just telling stories. She was connecting with people, amplifying voices that deserved to be heard. Through it all, Keanu remained a steady presence, offering guidance and encouragement. He reminded her to stay true to herself, to let her authenticity shine through. And as the project grew, so did Amara's sense of purpose. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. A moment of reflection. Months later, at the premiere of Everyday Heroes, Amara stood on stage in front of an audience of hundreds. The room was filled with the very people whose stories she had helped bring to life, their faces glowing with pride and gratitude. Keanu stood beside her, offering a reassuring smile as she stepped up to the microphone. "Courage," she began, her voice steady, "isn't about being fearless. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. I never imagined that a single moment of standing up to someone would change my life forever. But it did, and I'm here to tell you that your voice, your actions, and your truth matter. They can ripple outward in ways you can't even begin to imagine." The room erupted in applause, and as Amara looked out at the crowd, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. What had begun as a rainy night in a diner had blossomed into a movement, one that reminded her, and everyone watching, that courage could indeed change the world. The ripple effect of courage. The premiere of Everyday Heroes marked a turning point not just for Amara, but for countless others who would be touched by the documentary. Standing on the stage under the bright lights, with Keanu Reeves at her side and a sea of faces smiling back at her, Amara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had never imagined that her life would change so dramatically, all because of one moment of standing up for the truth. But as the applause thundered through the theater, she realized that courage, even in its simplest form, had the power to ripple outward and create waves of change. As the event wrapped up, attendees mingled in the lobby, their conversations buzzing with excitement. People from all walks of life, community leaders, activists, students, and families, approached Amara to thank her for her bravery. Some shared their own stories of standing up for what was right, while others spoke about how the documentary had inspired them to take action in their lives. One woman, a single mother named Celeste, approached Amara with tears in her eyes. "Your story gave me the courage to speak up against my boss," she said. "I've been dealing with unfair treatment for years, but after watching the film, I realized I deserved better. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to stand up for myself." Amara was moved to tears by Celeste's words. She hadn't fully grasped the impact her actions could have until now. "You're the real hero," Amara said, taking Celeste's hands in hers. "It takes so much strength to fight for yourself. Never forget that." A journey of growth. In the weeks following the premiere, Amara's life took on a new rhythm. The success of Everyday Heroes sparked a movement, and requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and collaborations began pouring in. Amara found herself traveling to schools, community centers, and conferences, sharing her story and encouraging others to embrace their inner strength. One of her most memorable visits was to a high school in Oakland, where she spoke to a gymnasium packed with students. Many of them came from challenging backgrounds, facing obstacles Amara could relate to from her own upbringing. She told them about her struggles, her fears, and how standing up for what she believed in had transformed her life. "Courage isn't about being fearless," she told the students. "It's about feeling scared and doing the right thing anyway. Even small acts of bravery can make a huge difference. You have that power." After her talk, a shy girl named Mia approached her, clutching her notebook, Maya said, "I've always wanted to start a club at school to help kids who feel alone, but I didn't think anyone would care. After hearing you speak, I think I want to try." Amara knelt down to Mia's level and smiled. "Not only will people care, but you might just change someone's life. You have no idea how powerful that is. Building something bigger." As the months turned into a year, Amara's role in the movement evolved. With the encouragement and support of Keanu and the production team, she founded an organization called Everyday Voices, a nonprofit dedicated to amplifying the stories of unsung heroes and empowering individuals to make a difference in their communities. The organization provided grants, mentorship programs, and resources for those seeking to create positive change. Amara threw herself into the work, using her own experiences to connect with people on a deeply personal level. From hosting workshops on leadership and advocacy to organizing local events that celebrated acts of kindness, she found purpose in uplifting others. Keanu remained an integral part of the journey, often surprising Amara with his humility and genuine investment in the cause. He attended fundraisers, helped secure partnerships, and even volunteered at grassroots events. Despite his fame, he never sought the spotlight, always redirecting attention to the people whose stories needed to be heard. One day, as they wrapped up a meeting about expanding Everyday Voices internationally, Keanu said, "You've turned one moment into a movement, Amara. Do you realize how extraordinary that is?" Amara laughed, shaking her head. "I couldn't have done any of this without you believing in me. You gave me a chance when I didn't even believe in myself." Keanu smiled. "You earned it. All I did was hold the door open." A personal reflection. As the second anniversary of the documentary premiere approached, Amara took a rare day off to reflect. She sat on a park bench overlooking the bay, the salty breeze carrying with it the memories of how far she had come. Her mind wandered back to that rainy night at Sonny's diner, where everything had changed. She thought about the fear she'd felt standing up to Earl, the sting of losing her job, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But she also thought about the people she had met since then: Celeste, Mia, and countless others whose lives had intersected with hers. She realized that her story wasn't just her own anymore. It was a thread woven into a much larger tapestry of courage, kindness, and resilience. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Emily, the producer who had first called her with the life-changing opportunity. "Emily, the board wants you to be the keynote speaker at the next Everyday Heroes Summit. You in?" Amara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She typed back a quick response. "Amara, always. A legacy of hope." When the next Everyday Heroes Summit finally arrived, Amara stood before an audience of thousands, her heart steady and her voice clear. The faces in the crowd were filled with hope, each one a testament to the ripple effect of courage. "2 years ago," she began, "I was just a waitress at a small diner in San Francisco. I never imagined that one moment of standing up for the truth would lead me here. But here's the thing. I'm not special. The courage I showed that night exists in all of us. It's in the single mom fighting for her kids. It's in the student starting a club to help others. It's in every act of kindness, no matter how small." She paused, letting her words sink in. "What I've learned is that courage isn't about grand gestures. It's about the choices we make every day to be kind, to be honest, and to stand up for what's right. And when we do, we create ripples that can change the world." The audience erupted in applause, and Amara felt a deep sense of peace. Her journey, which had begun with a simple act of bravery, had become a legacy of hope. And as she stepped off the stage, she knew that the ripples of her actions would continue to spread, inspiring others to find the courage within themselves to make a difference. The unseen ripples of courage. As the applause at the Everyday Heroes Summit faded and Amara stepped off the stage, a new chapter in her journey quietly began. Over the years, her life had transformed in ways she could never have predicted, yet one thing remained constant: the power of courage to create ripples far beyond the moment it was shown. The night after the summit, as Amara sat in her hotel room reflecting on the day, an email notification lit up her phone. She opened it, expecting another press inquiry or organizational update. Instead, it was a heartfelt message from a young woman named Sophia. Subject: Thank you for changing my life. Dear Amara, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I had to write. My name is Sophia, and I attended the summit today. Hearing your story was like looking into a mirror. You see, I've been dealing with a situation at work, a boss who undermines me and a team that ignores me because I'm a young woman in a male-dominated field. For months, I've kept my head down, afraid to speak up, thinking I'd lose everything if I did. But when you talked about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you, something in me shifted. You made me realize that staying silent was costing me more than speaking up ever could. Tomorrow, I'm walking into my boss's office and asking for the respect I deserve. No matter what happens, I'll know I have the courage to stand up for myself. And that's because of you. Thank you for being the voice I needed to hear. With gratitude, Sophia. Amara read the email twice, her chest tightening with emotion. Sophia's words were a reminder that the work she was doing mattered, not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in the small, deeply personal ways it touched individual lives. She drafted a quick reply. Dear Sophia, thank you for sharing your story with me. Your courage inspires me as much as mine inspired you. Remember, you are worthy of respect, and your voice matters more than you know. No matter the outcome, know that taking this step is a victory in itself. You've already won by choosing to stand up for yourself. With admiration, Amara. After sending the reply, Amara sat back, a smile tugging at her lips. She thought about all the Sophias out there, people quietly fighting battles no one else could see. It was their stories that fueled her passion, reminding her that courage wasn't about accolades or attention. It was about helping others find their own strength. A new opportunity. 2 months later, Amara received an unexpected call from a global organization dedicated to social justice and leadership development. The organization, known as the Catalyst Collective, invited her to join their advisory board. Their mission was to train the next generation of changemakers and provide them with the tools to tackle systemic challenges worldwide. We've been following your work with Everyday Voices, the caller explained. Your ability to connect with people and inspire action aligns perfectly with what we do. We'd love for you to bring your perspective to our team. Amara hesitated. While she was deeply honored, the thought of expanding her role on a global scale was daunting. Could she handle the responsibility? Would she have the expertise to make a meaningful contribution? But then she remembered the words she had spoken so many times. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about acting despite your fears. I'd be honored, she said, her voice steady. What's the first step? The global stage. Amara's involvement with the Catalyst Collective brought her to places she had only dreamed of visiting. She traveled to rural villages in Africa, urban centers in Asia, and underserved communities in South America, meeting people who were striving to create change in their own ways. In Kenya, she met a young woman named Amina, who had started a girls' education initiative in her village, despite facing intense cultural opposition. In Brazil, she worked alongside a group of environmental activists fighting to protect the Amazon rainforest. In India, she spoke to a room full of women who had formed a cooperative to escape poverty and build new lives for their families. Each encounter reminded Amara that courage was universal, transcending borders, languages, and circumstances. It wasn't limited to standing up to bullies or advocating for oneself. It was woven into the fabric of humanity, manifesting in acts big and small, visible and unseen. A ripple comes full circle. One afternoon, while preparing for a leadership summit in New York, Amara received a surprising message. It was from Earl McGowan, the regular at Sonny's Diner who had set her life on an unexpected course. The email was short, written in the blunt style she remembered from their exchanges at the diner. Subject: an apology. Amara, I've thought about that night at Sonny's a lot. At first, I was angry. But the more I saw your name in the news and heard about what you're doing, the more I realized something. I was wrong. I judged a man I didn't know and lashed out because I was bitter about my own life. And you stood up to me when no one else would. That took guts. I'm sorry for how I acted. And I'm proud of what you've done since. Respectfully, Earl. Amara stared at the email for a long moment, her emotions swirling. She had never expected an apology, least of all from Earl. But as she read his words, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. She replied simply, "Dear Earl, thank you for your kind words. It means a lot to me that you took the time to write this. We all make mistakes. It's what we do afterward that counts. I hope you're doing well, and I wish you the very best. Warm regards, Amara." Legacy in motion. Years later, as Amara stood on the stage of the United Nations, addressing a global audience about the power of everyday courage, she reflected on her journey. From a rainy night in a small diner to a movement that had touched millions of lives, her story was proof that even the smallest acts of bravery could spark transformative change. As she looked out at the crowd, she smiled, knowing that the ripples of her courage were still spreading, reaching places and people she could never have imagined. Courage, she said, her voice ringing clear, isn't just about changing the world. It's about changing one life at a time. And when you do that, you've already changed the world. The lesson of courage. As Amara stepped off the stage at the United Nations, the applause still ringing in her ears, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Not just for herself, but for the countless lives her journey had touched. Her story had begun with a single act of courage, a moment of standing up for what she believed was right, even when it cost her everything. Now that act had grown into a movement, one that inspired people around the world to embrace their own inner strength. Later that evening, Amara sat alone in her hotel room, reflecting on how far she had come. She thought about the people she had met along the way. Sophia, Mia, Amina, and even Earl. Each of them had reminded her that courage was not a one-time act, but a continuous choice. It wasn't about being fearless. It was about showing up, speaking out, and standing firm, even when the outcome was uncertain. She realized that the true power of courage lay in its ability to create ripples. One act of bravery could inspire another, and then another, until those ripples became waves of change. And while Amara had played her part, she knew that the real heroes were the people who took those lessons to heart and carried them forward. A final lesson. The next morning, as she prepared to leave New York, Amara received a message from Keanu Reeves. It was a simple note, but it encapsulated everything she had come to understand. Subject: a thought to carry. Amara, I've always believed that courage isn't just about standing up for what's right. It's about giving others the strength to stand up for themselves. You've done that in ways most people only dream of. Keep going. The world needs more ripples. With respect, Keanu. Amara smiled as she read the message, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about the movement, the people, and the lessons they would carry forward. Courage was contagious, and every person who embraced it added their own ripple to the vast ocean of change. The legacy of courage. Amara's story serves as a reminder that the smallest acts can have the biggest impact. Standing up for what's right might not always be easy, and it might not always come without a cost. But it is always worth it. For Amara, that night at Sunny's Diner wasn't just a turning point in her life. It was a seed that grew into a legacy of courage and kindness. Her journey teaches us that courage is a choice we all have the power to make, and when we do, we can inspire others to do the same. The lesson is simple yet profound. Be brave, even when it's hard. Speak the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And stand up, even when it feels like you're standing alone. Because in those moments, you're not just changing your life. You're changing the world, one ripple at a time. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.